She was to be hanged at dawn. Then the most feared gunslinger in the territory rode into town and called her his bride. A poison of whispers slithered through the crowd. "That girl poisoned her boss," one voice hissed, "emptied his safe and tried to melt into the night." Another spat, "She'll be swinging before the sun even warms the ground." Dozens of boots churned the pale dust as the folk of Dry Creek gathered around the makeshift gallows. It was little more than a collection of wooden crates, a length of rope, and two crooked beams, all the town required for what they called justice. At the heart of it all stood Eliza. Her wrists were bound in rough hemp, her ankles rubbed raw by iron shackles. The dress that clung to her in tatters had once been clean, cream-colored cotton. Now it was a ruin of dirt, blood, and spit. Her hair, matted and filthy, curtained a bruised cheek and a swollen eye that refused to open. The tears had stopped hours ago, lost somewhere between the beatings and the bone-deep silence. A bottle arced through the air, shattering near her feet. "Should have let the wolves have her," a woman snarled. "Burn her," a man bellowed. "No," an older voice countered, dry as dust. "The rope's quicker." The preacher read from a sweat-dampened page, his voice a droning fly. Sheriff Rudd stood beside him, arms crossed, chewing on a splinter of wood. None of them looked at her. Eliza kept her head bowed, her breath coming in slow, tired measures. She was not guilty, but in Dry Creek, being poor and unwanted was crime enough. The rope was already draped over the beam, its loop tied with practiced care. The hangman, a drunk whose cough rattled in his chest, tightened the noose, his eyes fixed on some point far beyond her. At a single nod from the sheriff, the coarse rope was drawn around her neck. The hangman stepped back. A moment stretched into an eternity, then shattered. A thunderclap of hooves exploded across the square. Gasps erupted as a black stallion charged through the crowd, kicking up a storm of dust as it reared. Astride it sat a man in a long, ash-gray duster, his wide-brimmed hat shadowing a face etched with grit and silence. He drew a revolver and fired once into the sky. The shot cracked louder than a whip, freezing every soul in place. "Get your hands off my wife," he growled, the sound like grinding stone. Silence. "I said, drop the rope," the gunslinger barked, his revolver now level with the gallows. Sheriff Rudd took a step forward. "Who in the hell are you?" "Someone you don't want to test." With a flick of his wrist, he sent a folded paper spinning from his saddlebag. It landed near the preacher's feet, flapping open in the dust. A marriage certificate. The hangman hesitated, glanced at the sheriff, and took a shuffling step away. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with a thud that seemed to shake the very boards of the platform. He climbed the steps. Eliza didn't look up, not even as his hand gently touched her arm. "You all right?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly quiet. She gave no answer. Her knees buckled. He caught her before she hit the floor, scooping her into his arms. A shot rang out from the crowd. His own revolver was faster. He spun, fired, and the shooter crumpled to the ground before the echo of the first shot had faded. Chaos erupted. He swung onto his horse with Eliza cradled against him, kicked the beast hard, and bolted. Bullets tore through the morning air as the square dissolved into a blur of screams and curses. He ducked low, shielding her with his body. The rope swung empty. And just like that, Eliza was gone. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when Cain's stallion thundered across the open plains, its hooves drumming a frantic rhythm on the cracked earth. Eliza was a dead weight against his chest, her face a ghostly white against the grime staining her torn dress. He held her steady with one arm, guiding the horse with the other, his gaze locked on the jagged hills that clawed at the distant sky. Behind them, the roar of pursuit was a faint but rising threat on the wind. Dry Creek would not let its prize go easily. At a fork in the trail, Kane made his first move. He reined the horse to a halt, dismounted, and led it through a dry riverbed, walking backward to scatter the prints. Then, doubling back, he struck west, dragging a spare pair of boots behind him to lay a false trail. The sun climbed higher, its heat becoming a physical weight. Eliza stirred once, a low moan escaping her lips, but she did not wake. By mid-morning, he found what he was looking for. A narrow pass hidden behind a cluster of scrub trees and sharp rock. There, nestled in a cleft of the hills, was a small cave, cool, shadowed, and silent. He laid Eliza down on the packed earth, uncorked a canteen, and trickled a few drops of water onto her lips. She coughed weakly, her eyelids fluttering open. Her eyes went wide when she saw him. "Where?" "You're safe," he said, his voice rough but low. "Back there. That wasn't justice. That was the law of wolves." Eliza blinked, the world slowly coming into focus. "Why did you—" Kane didn't answer. He handed her the canteen and turned away, his attention fixed on the pass below. The question hung between them like smoke. In the distance, a cloud of dust was rising. A search party, moving fast. Too fast. "Town dogs," he muttered, "and something worse." He reached for his rifle, a battered Winchester with a stock worn dark by sweat and time. He checked the chamber with a practiced flick of his thumb. "Eliza," he said, his back still to her. "We've got trouble. More than one kind." From behind a northern ridge, a second group emerged. Black coats, black horses, not townsfolk, bounty hunters. He recognized one of them, Mendez, a ruthless tracker out of El Paso who never asked questions, just collected heads. His presence was no accident. Kane swore under his breath. The men who had paid him to kill Eliza must have heard he'd let her live. Now they were sending wolves of their own to clean up the mess. He turned to Eliza. "We have to move. Now." She tried to sit up, wincing in pain. "I can't." "You don't need to run," he said, his eyes hard. "You just need to trust me." He led her through a narrow chute of rock behind a ridge, crouching low behind a high cluster of boulders that offered a clear view of the pass. After tying his horse to a hidden root, he loosened the saddle to make it look abandoned. Then, they waited. The wind picked up, stinging their faces with grit. Eliza shivered. Kane settled the rifle across the rocks, his movements economical and sure. "Stay down." Footsteps, hooves, voices. 3 men crested the rise, 2 from the town, 1 from Mendez's crew. Kane let the first step into the open. He took 1 breath. 2. Then he squeezed the trigger. The crack of the Winchester shattered the air. The man dropped like a puppet with its strings cut. The other 2 scattered for cover, but Kane's next round caught the bounty hunter mid-turn, the bullet tearing through his chest. The third man fled, boots skidding in the loose dirt. Kane did not fire again. Eliza stared, her breathing ragged. He lowered the rifle and met her wide, stunned gaze. "I only fire when I know what I'm aiming at," he said. She said nothing, but in her silence something shifted. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't gratitude. It was the first, faint glimmer of understanding. They were not safe. Not yet. But in Cain's cold precision, she saw the kind of man who had saved her. Not a hero, not a husband, but someone who never missed. The canyon was a winding scar of red stone, carved by wind and time into a place of profound silence. By the time Cain found the small alcove wedged between two sloping cliffs, the sun was a bloody smear on the horizon. He dismounted, lifted the weakened Eliza from the saddle, and carried her into the shelter. He set her down gently, handed her a blanket, and turned to build a fire. Sparks from flint and steel caught on dry shavings, and flames rose, slow and steady, pushing back the encroaching dark. Eliza sat with her knees drawn to her chest, her eyes lost in the fire's dance. Her throat was raw, her body and geography of aches, but her mind was sharp, watching, waiting. Across the flames, Cain cleaned his rifle with methodical grace, each motion deliberate and practiced. The firelight carved shadows on his face, revealing a scar that ran down his neck like a crack in stone. Finally, Eliza spoke. "You never answered my question." He didn't look up from his work. "I did." "That's not an answer. Why did you save me?" Cain paused, then glanced at her, the firelight glinting in his eyes. "Because you didn't cry." She frowned. "What?" "When they dragged you through that mob, when they tied your hands and pulled that rope tight, you didn't beg. You didn't scream." He leaned back, resting his arms on his knees. "Only the innocent are ever that quiet. They know the truth won't change a thing. The guilty, they always make noise." Eliza turned back to the flames. "I didn't cry because I knew no one would listen," she whispered. "Exactly," Cain said. "That's how I knew." The silence returned, heavier this time. "You know too much about me," she said, her voice barely audible. "You knew my mother died of fever. You knew about the burn on my hand." Cain's hands stilled. "I watched you for 12 days, he said, his voice flat. "Before the hanging." Her blood ran cold. "I was hired to kill you," he stated, without emotion. "Clean job. One shot." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. "But I saw how you lived," he continued, his gaze finally meeting hers. "I saw you give your own food to a starving kid. I saw you take a beating for defending another girl. I saw the fear in your boss's eyes when he looked at you, not the other way around. You were set to hang for his crime." That night, she didn't sleep. She watched the shadows creep across the canyon walls, his words echoing louder than any gunshot. In the deep dark before dawn, she rose silently and gathered her meager things. She reached for her torn boots and stopped. Beside them sat a brand new pair. Soft leather. Her size. Atop them lay a folded scrap of paper. "If you run, at least do it comfortably." Her fingers trembled as she stared at it. Her eyes drifted to Cain, still lying by the dying fire, unmoving. Had he known she would try to leave? Or had he simply accepted that she might? She sank to her knees. But she didn't put the boots on. When dawn kissed the canyon walls with gold, she stood, walked back to the fire, and sat across from him again. Cain opened his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He gave the faintest of nods. "Didn't think you would." The days that followed were quiet. The blistering sky softened, and the wind blew through the brush like an old whisper. Cain had gone to hunt, leaving Eliza with the fire and a pot of simmering beans. She moved slowly, cleaning their canteens and plates. When she reached for his coat, slung over a rock, she folded it neatly. That's when something fell from an inner pocket. A small, yellowed slip of paper, creased and stained at the corners. Her name stared up at her in faded ink. Eliza M. $500. Clean. Paid. Her stomach plummeted. Hands trembling, she unfolded it. The message was blunt. A job. A target. A price. She barely heard him return. Cain stepped from the brush, a rabbit slung over one shoulder. His eyes met hers and saw the paper. He didn't flinch. She held it out. Her silence a damning accusation. He dropped the rabbit and took the slip from her hand, folding it without a word. "You were hired to kill me," she said, her voice low and even. "Yes. For $500. He nodded. "How many others?" she asked, the question tearing from her throat. 21, he answered without pause. You would have been 22. Eliza felt her knees weaken, but she refused to fall. She stared at the man who had pulled her from a noose, fed her, and protected her. "You watched me for 2 weeks. I was trying to decide," he interrupted. "Decide what?" Her voice cracked. Cain looked her square in the eye. "If you were someone who deserved to die, you weren't." She looked away, her eyes finally wet, not with fear, but with a strange, sharp betrayal. She had known the world was cruel, but not so precise, not so methodical. Cain went to his saddlebag and pulled the revolver from its holster. He stepped forward and placed it gently on the rock between them. "If you want this to end," he said, his voice quiet, "you can end it. I won't run. I won't stop you." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Eliza took a slow step forward. Her hand reached out, not for the gun, but for the paper. She tore it clean down the center. Then again, and again, until only useless scraps fluttered into the dirt. She looked up at him, her voice hoarse. "You saved me, Cain. Now you better be damn sure you keep doing it." He looked at her, that unreadable storm back in his eyes. "I plan to," he said, "if you'll let me." Eliza didn't smile, but deep in her chest, something settled. Not trust, not yet, but the warm ashes of what it might one day become. The desert sprawled endlessly before them, a shimmering ocean of heat and fractured stone. Days blurred into nights. The sun boiled the air they breathed, but they kept moving. Cain taught her to aim, starting with tin cans and rabbit skulls. Her hands shook at first, but his patience was a steadying presence. "Don't shoot to scare," he told her, his hand over hers, his voice low. "You shoot to stop. And if I miss, then you breathe and you shoot again." One night, under a sky littered with stars, she asked him about his past. "I was a soldier first," he said, poking the fire. "Then a bounty hunter. Then nothing." "Why nothing?" He stared into the flames. "Because killing is easy. Living after, that's the hard part." She looked at him then, and saw not just a gunslinger, but a man carrying the weight of 21 souls. "I don't think you're nothing," she said quietly. He didn't answer, but she saw the tension in his shoulders ease. They were nearing the edge of the wastelands when the ambush came. A single crack of a rifle, and Kane was thrown from the saddle, blood blooming across his shoulder. He hit the sand hard, groaning as he fumbled for his gun. A man with a scarred face, one of Mendez's, stepped from behind the rocks, his own revolver raised. "Drop it!" he barked. "This time, you stay down." Kane tried to lift his weapon, but he was too slow. Eliza moved. She didn't think. She aimed, she breathed, and she fired. The gun kicked in her hand, the sound a thunderclap in the sudden quiet. The man's body jerked, his eyes wide with disbelief before he crumpled to the sand. Silence. Awful and complete. Kane rolled to his side, clutching his shoulder, his breathing ragged. Eliza stood frozen, the revolver still locked in her grip. Tears streamed down her face, but her hands did not waver. Kane looked at her, his voice tight with pain. "You all right?" She managed a single, shaky nod. Then slowly, she lowered the gun. Her knees gave way, and she knelt in the dust beside him. His blood soaked warm and dark through the fabric of her trousers as she pressed a trembling hand to the wound. "I didn't think," she whispered, her voice choked and raw. He grimaced, pain carving new lines into his face. "You did just fine. I shot him." The admission was flat, empty. "Yes," he rasped. "You did." "I didn't want to." "I know," he breathed. "But I would do it again, if it meant you lived." Kane looked at her then, not with pride, not with fear, but with something deeper. Gratitude. He reached with his uninjured hand and touched her cheek. "You saved my life." She shook her head, a tear tracing a path through the grime on her face. "You saved mine first." For the first time since they met, Eliza leaned in and rested her forehead against his. No more running. No more doubt. The desert wind howled past them, wild and sharp, but their hearts, for the first time, stood still. Together. The sky had turned the color of bruised steel by the time dusk settled over the abandoned mining valley. Jagged hills surrounded them like the broken teeth of some long-dead beast, silent but watchful. Kane was a dead weight against her on horseback, his shoulder seeping blood through a bandage already soaked twice over. His skin burned under her fingers, too hot, too pale. She guided the horse toward the dark maw of a mine entrance. The timbers were half rotted, the rails snapped and buried under drifts of sand. A crooked sign still hung by a single rusted chain. Durham number 7. It had been dead for years, forgotten, empty, perfect. Eliza dismounted first, her own body aching, and helped him down. He staggered, nearly collapsing, but she caught him, her small frame bracing his. "You're going to rest now," she said, her voice firm. "No more moving." Kane didn't argue. He hadn't spoken a word since she'd shot the bounty hunter. His breath came in short, shallow gasps, and the color had vanished from his lips. Inside, the mine was cool and dark. The stale air, thick with the scent of old coal and damp rock, clung to them. She found a wooden platform left behind by miners and laid him down gently, covering him with their last blanket. She lit a small lantern, keeping the flame low. Shadows danced across the stone walls, like the ghosts of men who had never made it out. He tried to sit up, his voice a broken whisper. "We can't. Stay here. Too long." "I know," she murmured, kneeling beside him. But you're bleeding out. I have to stitch it again. Kane gritted his teeth as she worked. Threading the needle with shaking hands, she forced herself not to cry. He didn't flinch when the needle pierced his skin, didn't make a sound. He just stared at the ceiling, as if he could outlast the pain by simply ignoring it. Outside, the wind changed. They were being hunted again. Eliza checked the rifle, loading every bullet she had left. And then she saw it. In a far corner, shoved behind torn tarps and coated in dust, were crates. Dynamite. Old, cracked, but still viable. She moved on pure instinct, quiet and fast. She laid a string of charges along the lower shaft, connecting them to a single fuse line, and dragged the loose coil back toward the entrance. She left one path open, just wide enough for two men to enter single file. Kane's voice was weak behind her. "What are you doing?" "They'll come in," she said, her back to him. "They always do." "Eliza." She turned, and in the dim lantern light, he saw the hard resolve in her eyes. "You said I needed to learn how to shoot. You never said I couldn't learn how to fight." Kane tried to argue, but the words wouldn't come. His eyes fluttered closed. She bent and kissed his forehead, a soft, desperate gesture. "You stay with me," she whispered, "no matter what." An hour passed in suffocating silence. Then, the distant sound of hooves, the crunch of boots, voices carried on the wind. She heard them long before she saw them, at least 4, maybe 5. They crept down the path like wolves in the dark, guns raised, flashlights slicing the shadows to pieces. Eliza crouched by the entrance, fuse in hand, her heart a cold, steady drum in her chest. "Where is he?" one of them barked. "They've got to be down here," another voice answered. "Kane's too hurt to run far. Leave the girl. The man's the contract." Eliza's eyes narrowed to slits. Her hand holding the match was perfectly still. She let the first 2 men pass into the main shaft, their boots crunching on loose rock, sealing their own fate. The moment their feet hit the inner track, she struck the match. The fuse hissed. 1 second. 2. The mine roared like the mouth of hell. The blast shook the very stone around her, sending fire, rock, and smoke screaming through the shaft. Screams echoed once, then were swallowed by the thunder. Then, there was only silence and the slow, groaning collapse of timber and dust. Eliza scrambled back, coughing, her eyes burning. Kane hadn't moved. She dropped to her knees, shaking his shoulder. Kane, wake up, please." His skin was colder now, his breath a faint whisper. "Don't you dare," she breathed, her voice cracking. "Don't you leave me. You don't get to choose for both of us." She laid her body over his, holding him close, trying to give him her own warmth. "I will not let you die," she said, tears finally falling, hot on her cheeks. "Not while I'm still breathing." His eyes fluttered, barely focusing on her. "You okay?" She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You idiot." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Told you not to stay. And I told you I'd choose." She kissed him, a salty, fast, desperate kiss. "Stay with me, Kane. Please, just stay." His fingers brushed against hers, a flicker of strength in his touch. "I'm not going anywhere." They lay together on the cold stone, hearts hammering in the sudden quiet, the mind behind them sealed by fire and fury. She had chosen, and this time, She had not chosen to run. She had chosen to fight for him, because for the first time in her life, someone had fought for her. Cain awoke to a stillness that comes only after fire and pain, after the world has collapsed and only the dust remembers how to breathe. He opened his eyes slowly, blinking against the soft morning light that filtered through the wreckage of the mine's entrance. The air was cool and quiet, as if the earth itself had exhaled and gone still. He tried to shift, and a deep, slow ache pulled at his shoulder, a hollowed-out reminder of the night before. And then he saw her. Eliza sat beside him, her back against the stone wall, her head slumped sideways in sleep. But her hand never loosened its grip on his, both of hers wrapped around his like an anchor to the living. Her face was smudged with ash, a smear of blood dried near her temple. But as she stirred, her eyes meeting his, there was no fear left in them, only fire. "You're awake," she said, her voice hoarse. His throat was dry, his tongue thick as dust. He swallowed and managed to rasp. "Told you, not going anywhere." A shaky breath escaped her, a sound that needed no words. They sat in the quiet for a long time, wrapped in the gentle echo of a life not taken. Then, softly, she asked, "If there's no one left to pay you to kill, if there's no debt, no contract, then who are you, Cain?" He blinked slowly, the question hitting him like an arrow shot deep and true. He looked past her, into the rising light. After a pause long enough to hold the weight of a lifetime, he said, "I'm the last man you trust." Eliza didn't flinch. She just looked at him as if she already knew and only needed to hear him say it aloud. Her thumb brushed against his palm, slow and deliberate. Her voice dropped to a whisper meant only for him. "And this time I'm the one who chooses." Cain looked at her fully then. The streaks of soot across her cheeks, the fierce steadiness in her eyes. She was not a damsel, not a victim. She was not a woman who needed saving. She had saved him. He didn't deserve it, but he would not refuse it. His fingers, weak but warm, curled around hers. "I won't let you regret it." "I already don't," she replied. Behind them, a hollowed-out mine. Ahead, an uncertain trail. And between them, a fragile, fierce, undeniable truth. She had chosen him, and he had chosen to stay. The border town of Loretto was the kind of place where names faded like worn denim. It was a town built on second chances, where the past was rarely mentioned, and scars were just part of a man's handshake. At the edge of town, a small adobe cafe stood beneath a crooked mesquite tree. Above its swinging doors, a hand-painted sign read, in faded but proud letters, "Eliza's." Cain hammered the last nail into a new shutter, the morning sun warming his back. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing the pale, thin line of a bullet scar on his forearm. Inside, the scent of strong coffee drifted out on the breeze. Eliza moved behind the counter with an easy grace, an apron tied around her waist, a smudge of flour on her cheek. She served tamales to two ranch hands, her quiet hum filling the comfortable silence. Their life had become this: simple, soft, shared in silent glances, and the steady rhythm of two people who no longer needed words to say everything. It was enough. Until the door creaked open. A man stood there, tall and dust-stained, his boots striking the floorboards like a warning. His eyes, cold as iron, scanned the room. Then they settled on Cain. "You him?" the man asked. His voice cracked with miles. "Cain Gravehand? The bounty hunter from Elkhorn Ridge?" The cafe fell silent. Eliza stepped forward, her hands clean, her voice even. That man doesn't live here anymore. The stranger raised a brow. He used to belong to men with coin and contracts, she said, her gaze unwavering. Now he belongs to me. The man looked from her to Cain. Whatever he saw in Cain's eyes wasn't a threat, but it wasn't weakness either. It was stillness, a peace earned at a high price. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, then turned and walked out. Cain let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Eliza turned to him, wiping her hands on her apron, a small, real smile touching her lips. The sun began its slow descent, throwing golden light across everything it touched. He was sent to kill her, but he chose to save her. And in the end, she chose him. Not just to live, but to finally feel alive. If their story struck something deep in you, if you felt the desert wind, the thunder of hooves, and the hush of two hearts choosing each other in a world that gave them no chances, then you're right where you belong. This is Wild West Love Stories, where justice is personal, love rides on instinct, and every bullet dodged is a vow kept. Subscribe for more raw, emotional tales of passion and redemption across the untamed American frontier. Tap the bell so you never miss a story where love isn't always gentle, but it's always real. Thanks for riding with us. We'll see you at the next sunset.